All right, so we'll just get right to it because we have quite a bit of stuff to cover. So last class we went over notifications, did a bit more work with delegations. So let's do a quick review just so it's fresh in our minds. We're not going to work with those today specifically, but we definitely are going to work with them next week again. So let's do a quick review. What are the steps of setting up delegation?
Well, first of all, you need to think about your two files, right? You have your sender and your receiver.
Yep.
And in the sender, you're gonna just quickly put the skeleton of what your protocol is gonna be. You do that right before you declare your class.
Yep.
So if you have variables or methods or stuff like that, you're just gonna find it.
So protocol first, with usually the method, right? Yep.
And then in the receiver, you're gonna actually define what those functions, what those methods do, stuff like that. And also at the header, you're gonna say that it's gonna be blah 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 delegate, or you're gonna use that same protocol name to say that it conforms to that protocol.
Okay, so the first one, the receiving.
The receiver, yes. So the receiver you conforms, conforms, and then you define the methods. And then finally, you go back to your sender, and you're gonna create a function that basically calls a delegate and sending some information.
First, you're gonna define delegate in your second
In the receiver.
in the receiver, right? So you're gonna say var delegate, and then the delegate is pointed to from the first place, right? In the first place, you're saying that delegate, the second controller delegate is equal to self, right? So the delegate you identify in the second controller points to self in the other one, to that class, right?
So I think the only thing that's a little bit not confusing, but twist your mind a little bit is your receiver chronologically will happen before your sender, right? So you have your receiver, and then as you're calling your sender, you're also saying, hey, by the way, I'm going to be the delegate of that sender.
So before you go to your sending view controller, you've got to tell the second view controller that the delegate is set to that first view controller that is taking us to the second view controller. Anybody have questions on that?
So that one more time again.
Yeah. So before you go to your second view controller, so you programmatically say, load view controller identifier or use one of the methods we've gone over. You also say you identify the second view controller. So you say like VC equals right. You find the second view controller, and then you say the delegate in the second view controller equals to self, equals to this class. So that delegate references the current class right before it changes over.
So in both view controllers, the I'll say sending and the receiving one conforms to the protocol.
Yep.
We have not an identical but a similar declaration because in the sending one it says self dot something dot delegate equals self.
This is the first one, and the one that's receiving, right? Because you're setting the delegate in the second one be the class of the first one.
And in the first one, the one that's sending, we say var. I just wanted to understand the difference of what they each refer to when
sketch this out real quickly. Yeah. So you're going from here to here, right? And over here you're saying, var VC equals, find this VC, right? So is storyboard second VC, right? And over here you're saying VC dot delegate equals self. Right. Now over here you have a var delegate, which is a type of the protocol, right?
So which one is conforming to the protocol?
The first one, the left.
The first
The left one. Okay.
Right.
Yeah, that's exactly what.
So over here, all you're saying is the delegate is defined here, this one right here, equals self over here.
Okay.
This one. And self refers to this whole class.
So delegate is the one that receives.
So delegate is the one that delegate is the one that receives. So this one is a delegate, and this one is a delegating object.
That's what I didn't get first.
Yeah. That's all nomenclature, as long as you understand what's going on. So over here, you're setting the delegate to access this class. And why are we doing that? To send back information, so we can call the method that sits in here. Because our method sits in the first view controller, right?
Which is the function that we define in the protocol.
Yep.
Above the class.
Yep.
And the other on the other side.
Yeah. So over here, whenever you switch back, you do delegate dot method that receives info, right? Which refers to this one over here. And the information that passes from here is what's valuable for us to receive here. Right? And then based on what we receive, we perform an action on this view or our logic.
So the var delegate on the right-hand side, that is, when you set that equal to anything?
No, this is optional, right? Because this will not equal anything. This will not mean anything if we're loading this view from somewhere else. This will only mean something if the view that takes us here prepares it to equal itself, right? So this VC, the delegate itself, is giving this a value. Otherwise, it's not going to value.
So the one on the right-hand side, the one that Dave just asked about,
Yeah.
that's kind of just, if I know this might be wrong the way I'm saying it, but as close as I can get, you're instantiating an object off of a protocol, right? Over there, because kind of.
Sort of. It's just a variable. It's just a variable that refers to a potential object. It's an option. Yeah.
Take the bottom here where you delegate dot.
The method that sits over here.
Okay.
Yeah.
That method.
The one right methods the CC function. Cool. Okay.
Is this unique to iOS? I mean, because everything's so sandboxed.
So delegation is a computer science theory. It's super useful in here, and it's implemented via iOS library, but technically it's done in Java. Anything that has inheritance, Java is one of those things. You can do it in. It's not as straightforward in Java because Java does not have optionals. But there are languages that have structure rules, right? So for us in Swift, it's protocols, and Java is inheritance. There's other languages that inheritance as well. Go is a language that does that. There's quite a few old languages that support that. So it's a good pattern to know. Even if you don't use other languages, it's good to understand what happens in these objects and how things are expected, right? If you don't even use other languages, it's still kind of broaden your mind to just thinking that expectation of objects passing information. Cool. So how do notifications work?
3 steps.
Okay. Let's hear the 3 steps.
Post, set, and execute.
Post, set, execute. Very good. Is it always 3 steps?
Yeah.
Because we can set our own notifications, but iOS also gives notifications,
The
right?
predefined system.
So very often we just add observers to listen for the predefined. That's right. And what do we use notifications for?
Trigger events.
Trigger events. Do we pass data in our notifications?
You should.
You shouldn't, but you can.
Well, considering, I mean, you can pass a string, right?
You can pass anything through it, actually.
Yeah.
You can pass objects, but you shouldn't. The way that the information that passes is used is information describing the event, not the action presenting it or the event or the thing itself.
So what is, you said observer?
Yep.
So what's the difference between that and property observers? Are those one and the same?
Oh,
Because someone corrected some of my code. And I wanted to know what that is.
it sort of works the same way. the way observers work in any language is they look for something to change, a state change. So property observers, basically they listen for whenever one of your properties or variables changes, and you can execute code based on those things changing. But they're only aware of themselves, right? Notifications, they're sitting somewhere else, and they're technically waiting for a trigger, but not necessarily a property. So they're waiting for just something to ping them before they execute something. And the thing that executes is outside of the notification. The property observer is directly coupled to that function. So notification method, notification design pattern gives us the ability to have total abstraction in our events and our logic. Questions on that? What kind of a design pattern is notification? Remember, was singleton, right? Very good. And what's a singleton?
It's an object. There's only one of each of it in your app. Yeah.
Only one reference to the object. And the purpose for that is just so it's globally available. And why? So with that in mind, is it good practice to have a whole bunch of things sitting in a singleton object? No, right. So it's global, right? Out of memory.
You're giving away the answers the way you're asking the question.
Or maybe you just know it that well.
You're helping us too.
Any questions on that before we move on? So there was one subject matter that we didn't cover last time, which is dictionaries. And I don't want to move that today because I want today to be specifically about views. We'll have a bit more leeway next week to work on dictionaries. So today, we're going to specifically work on drawing our views programmatically. We've already kind of started that. Like last class, Thomas' example, he drew a navigation controller programmatically and the buttons for the navigation controller. Today, we're going to go over best practices for drawing those views. We're going to go through drawing quite a bit of those views programmatically. We're going to go over having an application that does not have an interface builder, where we just have view controllers and just draw our application through code. We're going to go through working with layouts. So far we've been setting our layouts to compact any, not any, right? That's because there's a bit of math, there's a bit of voodoo that we could do to organize everything, and we just haven't had the need so far. But ideally, what's super efficient about iOS development is we can actually develop for any size, and we should be able to resize our screens logically, right? So we'll start delving into that today. Today we're going to go over springs and struts, which is one of those methods. But there's a much better way called auto layout, which we're going to focus on next class. Springs and struts was great up until a couple of years ago, until auto layout came out. Actually, it was even last year when auto layout was not fully fleshed out. There were bugs with it. Springs and struts are still used. Now I haven't used springs and struts since the past year. So auto layout is definitely the winning contender, but springs and struts is definitely the easier way of implementing. So we're going to go over those, and then we're going to go over scroll view. And scroll view is essentially, we've kind of had exposure to scroll view. Our tables, we scroll through our cells. A table is technically a scroll view with cells and certain properties and the functionality. So we'll learn to implement scroll views, add things to our scroll views, and figure out how the logic of framing our scroll views work. I think it's going to be a fun class. It's not going to be as visual in terms of dragging things around, but we'll have a really good proficient understanding of how views work and how views are formed and the hierarchy of views.
So UI table view inherits from UI scroll view. If that makes sense. Inherits from
Yeah, I slightly highlighted this when we went over UI table view last class, and we clicked through the code for UI table view. I highlighted UI scroll view. But again, don't worry about that right now. Just know that that's going to be the scenes. Cool. So why? Let's talk about the theory here. Why build views programmatically, right? As our applications are getting a bit more advanced, we pass data around. We now have conditional ways of displaying things. Right? We have a lot more use cases where we might not want to show a certain screen, or we might want to hide a good portion of the screen, or maybe we want to have things more modular. We want to pass around things as objects and not just through interface builder. So doing this code allows us to be a lot more flexible, a lot more dynamic in the way we build things. It doesn't tie us to only interface builder. Interface builder is great, but if we're collaborating with a lot of folks, it might be a bit more difficult to understand what's going on in versioning, right? If you looked at your GitHub account and you look at submits, whenever you make an interface builder's submission, you don't really see it in code, right? You do say it in XML, but it's not quite so straightforward. So if you're working with a team of 5, 10, 15 folks, the changes, although they're in the commit messages, might not be as straightforward. So it's super efficient for that. The way, I'll say it right now, the way I usually build my applications, I try as much as I can to always build my skeletons and frames in interface builder. So anything that's kind of like the framed application, maybe the header, maybe the footer, maybe the screen itself. But a lot of the content on the screen, I usually do programmatically. Tomas, how do you usually approach?
Yeah, same thing. Like for instance, I'm working on the calendar thing right now. So the headers for the calendar and stuff, and the buttons is all like using interface builders. But that UI collection view at a calendar is all line code. It's just an empty gap sitting there on my storyboards.
Yeah. So storyboards are great for us to see like the number of screens, right? But not necessarily for us to predict what the user's going to direct their applications. And very often, whenever I, for example, select a button, I might want the button to be removed, right? It might be a one-time click. So instead of just hiding it, we should be able to destroy it. Same logic for building it. So doing this through code lets us do this very efficiently. And as far as layouts, I mentioned springs and struts and other layouts. Springs and struts are a lot easier than other layouts, so we'll have time to cover those today. And if we have time, I'll go over some of the basics of other layouts. But for the time being, we're just going to stick to springs and struts. And they can be mixed and matched. It's pretty bad practice, in my opinion, to mix and match them. I usually just stick to auto layouts. How do you usually?
Always auto layout.
Yeah.
So wait, how do you say? Because I thought based on your, let's for example, with this calendar. So it looks like you have certain views that are already sitting on your storyboard. So I guess for these that are sitting on your storyboard, you use auto layout to put them correctly. But then for that emptiness thing, you're going to use string and.
We're actually not going to work on layout at all. We're going to use springs and struts for everything right now.
Okay.
And on Interface Builder, you can also actually use springs and struts. And this is getting a bit ahead here, but there is an actual check mark you can select in your project for enabling auto layout. If you unclick auto layout, it defaults back to springs and struts. But we're going to only implement springs and struts for code today.
We haven't defined yet springs and struts.
No. They're just a way of laying things out. That's all we know for now. Yeah, Dave.
So in terms of file management, now that we're going to talk about two new additional things, we always create new subfiles for our classes, right? You obviously have a new file for every controller.
Yep.
Do you have separate files dedicated to protocols and structs as well?
For structs, yes. For protocols, no. Protocols should be within the main class or struct file.
Okay. And then for springs and struts?
So those are just properties we set for our objects. Cool. So there's a few new concepts which we're going to cover today, which will be omnipresent throughout all of our programmatic creation of these objects. So those are CG floats. CG floats are essentially just like floats that we're aware of, but they're used specifically for drawing things on our views. CG stands for core graphics, and it's used for two-dimensional points. So a CG point is essentially a coordinate which has two CG floats, and the coordinate is always an x and y. So if we have an object drawn in our view, it has a CG point which has CG floats. CG size, we're not going to see that too much, but essentially it's used for width and height. And again, all the points we're going to work on that involve drawing things on our views and sizing things in our views, they're all going to be CG float types. So a CG size has a width and height. And a CG rect, you'll see much more often from this point on, is essentially a rectangle. All of our views are rectangles. They might seem like circles, but all it really is a rectangle with the rounded borders, right? So everything in our views is really a rectangle. Now there are stuff beyond the scope where we can actually draw things like Bezier curves and use another method, but that's way beyond the scope of this class. We can have custom views, which are rectangles, squares, circles, etc., etc. But you can really accomplish anything and everything with CG rects. So everything we're going to be using for drawing stuff on our views is going to be a CG rect that has a width, the height, the x, and y position.
So these shapes, are these just shapes that I can draw within my app, or can I convert these to a text field, a label, button?
Yeah, so all those things you mentioned, they're all views, right? And all views need to have these properties. They all need to have an x and a y in your view grid, and a width and height. So all of your objects you mentioned, they all need to have this CG rect perimeter that goes inside.
But what I was referring to, these objects, the text, for example, there's a certain logic, intelligence behind or in that object that receives text, and then you can manipulate it via dot text, etc., etc. When I use these methods over here, is it to draw objects that have absolutely that I can't manipulate at all, that would have no intelligence whatsoever?
No, all those, even the ones that you're aware of, they're all going to use the CG rect property.
Okay.
Because they still need to be told their size and location. That's a good question. Cool. Any questions so far? So CG floats, you'll see across all of these properties have CG floats inside them. Points have floats, sizes have floats, rectangles has a mixture of these two that have floats. There's a bit more nomenclature I want us to be familiar with before we start drawing things out. And we're already familiar with superclasses and subclasses, right? The same thing, the same logic applies to views. So we have superviews and we have subviews. Superviews can have multiple subviews, and subviews can only have one superview, right? Anyone have any questions as to how and why that works? Just like classes, right? Inheritance. Before we go to the other ones, I want to talk about kind of how things are laid out in our views before we go on.
One thing that I have a question about, you sort of hinted on it yesterday, is, I mean, it's a stupid question, but like we've always worked on, let's see, like, well, we've worked mostly with view controllers. And yesterday, or on Monday, you did an example where you embed a table view into the like standard view. So, I guess well, I was confused as to why we didn't just use a table view controller.
Sure.
At that point.
Yeah, that's a good question. So table view controllers, they have a table view that spans across the whole screen, right? If you want to have other things on there, you couldn't drag them into a table view controller, right? So just so we can mix and match things.
Like for example, the to-do list app. It's much more realistic to have the text entry field in the same scene as the to-do list itself and not go back.
Sure.
Yeah, if all we're doing is entering just a
Yeah,
string.
that's all you're doing, yeah.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, this brings me to my question, is like the difference between, like, when you're gonna talk about like the super view and sub views, like, I've up till then been thinking of those two things, like a view and a view controller as being like the one and the same.
Yeah.
And obviously that's not the case.
Yeah, so yeah, that's a very good question. So the view controller, as we know it, interface builder, is essentially square, right? So all view controllers have a view that sits inside here, and this view spans the whole width of the pixel. So view controllers, you have a UI view that is the first layer here. So we have view controller, then we have view, which is UI view, and then we have everything else we drag and drop in here, right? And so far, most things we've done, they've all been like linear things, right? We have a button, we have a label, we might have a text field.
And like, those have all been at the same hierarchy.
They're all the same hierarchy. Now we can actually have things embedded within themselves. So we can also have another UI view in here that also has a text field, etc., etc. So if we think about a button, and we'll explore this in our Xcode soon, a button itself is actually a view, but a button also has a label embedded inside it. That's the text of a button, right? So a button itself has a label, right? So there's a sense of hierarchy. Our main view, we can reference our view controller as self.view, which we'll go over soon, and then everything else with the drag and drop stuff, right? So we'll get into that in more in code in a little bit. But so far the hierarchy is we have a view controller that has a view, right? There's also one more layer on top of this, which is actually our window.
Could you resize your window?
No.
I'm just kidding.
No. So the UI window, we actually can reference just to set things to be good size or get certain properties. But in the context of iOS applications, because everything is full screen, we are never, ever going to manipulate our window. Maybe change the background color now and then, but you're never going to change your UI window. UI window is the very base, and UI window is the very roots of your application view. So that's your first view. So we go UI window, view controller. If there's navigation controller, there's a navigation controller between this. View controller, and then view, and then everything else within that. Question on that so far? So UI window, view controller, view, and everything else is in there. Huh? True. Now, UI window, this inherits from just normal plain old Cocoa, not Cocoa Touch. And UI window in OS X development, we can actually change the size, manipulate the size, right? Because we have tiled windows, right? But in iOS, we don't have that. So there's no reason for us to ever do anything with UI window or changing its properties. Cool.
So you say you also have a window, the object have a format.
I'm sorry?
Do they also use the window when you develop formats?
Yeah, you have a window that's used for Mac OS X.
But here you can resize.
There, just resize and do things with it. Yeah.
Yeah, so you also only have, when you say there's only one super view, there's only one super view per scene.
There's only one super view for your object, right? Because if I have a button here, my super view is my view, right? If I have another view here with the text, my super view here is my view. So this one, my super view is the view. A super view here is my window, right?
Okay. So like the whole situation, there's not one super view.
Yeah, exactly. That make sense? After classes, this should be pretty straightforward, right? It's exactly the same logic. Just we haven't gone over the UI window yet, or how it basically works. It's fairly simple subject matter. So the frame is we need to have a frame for everything we lay out on our views. So the frame is essentially, remember the CG Rect we discovered, which the CG Rect has what properties? Yeah, exactly. So they're all float kinds, but we have an x, y, width and height, right? So the frame is the x coordinate, the y coordinate, the width, and the height in relation to the super view, right? So the x and the y of my button over here is in relation to this view, so it's all relative. And it's very important to remember this for now. So frames is relative size and position to the super view.
Was it always center of the object?
Is it what?
You see the coordinate.
Top left corner. Top left corner. Good question. Yep.
Did you change that?
Yes, you can change that, but you should. So top left corner, and we can decide where it ends by the width, right? Figure out the ending coordinate by top left corner and width overall thing. Now bounds, I don't want us to go into a theoretical debate here because it's gonna make more sense when we go into scroll view. But bounds are essentially, they have coordinates and sizes in relation to the inside of the object, right? So for most of these elements, bounds are always, it always starts at 0, 0, and we don't have to worry about anything. But when we go to scroll views, we can have a scroll view that is, x 0, y 0, right? Then has a width of, let's say, 100 by 200, right? So this is relative to my overall view, right? However, I can have the inside of my scroll view be a lot larger than what's present over here, what we see here. So those bounds changing are what let us scroll the scroll view. But I don't want to worry too much about that right now. Just know that bounds are kind of like frames, but for the internal properties, the internal coordinates of the object.
So they become relevant only when we got scrolling.
Yeah.
When we can't fit as many objects in straightforward.
Exactly. Yeah.
It sounds like that also is a factor when you're doing apps for iPads versus iPhones.
Yeah, so technically, that's kind of a good point, right? So technically, if we have, well, that needs to be a scroll view, so it's still the same thing. It still needs to be within one view, just relative of the overall screen. So it's a good point. I just don't want to go in that direction.
So does design play like a huge role in this part? Because if you're doing all this programmatically, like how would you know like what the frames and the bound should be in relation to one another if you're not like working on like a visual?
For me, this is actually easier than visually because visually you set things with like dashes and rulers and guidelines. Here you have hard concrete numbers. What about you, Thomas?
Yeah, same thing. Also, what is very useful if you combine it to, let's say you want something to be the width, like minus 40 pixels of your screen. You can get your screen size to be minus 40 pixels, so you know your X value has to be 20 pixels, and your thing is perfectly centered, like no questions asked.
Yeah.
Which is great.
I don't know. Sorry. I think what you're asking is, how are you going to do all this much design? I mean, you have to do design.
Well, you should always have a design done before.
Yeah.
So the design.
It's all in their head, they can't visualize it.
You're actually working from.
You should always. It doesn't matter if you're doing 3-phase builder code. You should always at least have a sketch before you do anything.
For some reason, till now, whenever I use the guidelines, center an object in a scene, when I run the app, even if it builds successfully, So I,
We didn't use our layout yet.
Yeah, that's next class.
This is gonna be pretty easy to do it in code to center stuff.
so I'm guessing that.
Yeah.
So when you said specifically, you're talking about sort of like pixels and making sure something is centered, that change?
Points.
Okay, so then maybe that makes more sense. That's when I say, does that change based on whether you're like on a 6, on an iPhone 6, or a 5,
I mean,
or a
it's-
4?
It still does, right? It's not because you center something or you have something minus
I
40.
thought you said pixels, so I know pixels, like,
Yeah, I was
gets all
sorry.
left up if you like are on a different.
But it's not because you have something minus 40 points of your screen width that it's going to be the same. I mean, of course not. It's not going to be the same width, actual width on iPhone 6 or as an iPhone.
Right.
So gotta be said
It's still going to be set, but it's going to have like,
that margin.
As
yeah,
long as
It's
you
all
use
relative.
points and not pixels.
yes.
Because
There's no
of-
way to use pixels.
Oh, really?
You can't.
Pixels get calculated automatically based on the points. Right. And you can read more here. That's a good article. And then with the views, we're gonna get a lot more familiar with this, but we've changed stuff like background color, things like alpha, corner radius is one of them, which some of you have already found out. And the cool thing is, whenever you change the size of the view, if you stick it within an animation method that we went over before, it animates whenever you change that size. So it gives us a pretty easy way to do those animations. So springs and struts will bend your brain a little bit the first 5 minutes, but when we go into code, it'll be a bit more straightforward. So going back to sizing our views. Right, so I have a view here. I'm gonna start drawing. Actually, I'll do this. And let's say I have a view of some sort right here. Right? So whenever I change I rotate over, what happens is this thing stays where it is, but our parent view changes. So what happens is we get something like this maybe, right? And it might even look uglier, not some of this depending size. So springs and struts give us a good way to lay out these objects as views in our parent views relative to the parent view. So what we can say is, I have my view here, and I have a little, let's say you draw like a happy face, right? Scrappy,
It's a bad thing.
little robot.
So this is a view controller with the view side.
So if I go to this direction, these are actually really large, so what will happen is I'll end up getting this, like so, and then something like that. Right? These will not be in their respective corners. The size of the eyes will not change, and the size of the mouth will not change. So how do we get the eyes to stick on each side and get the mouth to stick on to be the same size as the width, right? So again, best way to do this is on the layout, but springs and struts gives us a bit of an easier way to apply it because we only have a few options. So there are two things to remember in springs and struts. Springs are essentially the ability for us to get things to stay at a certain location relative to the overall size of the thing. And struts actually get us to size things, actually it's reversed. Springs get us to resize the object based on the parent's view, and then struts get us to hold things where they are. So what that means is, I have this mount over here, and I can give it a relative width to the parent, So what happens here is whenever the size of the parent changes, whether it's the iPhone screen, the window, or whether it is the view that owns it, I can make this mouth change proportionally to the parent container, right? So I can make this mouth now proportionally take the whole width of this view when I go into landscape mode. So the way we do that is we say, give it a flexible width. So number one is flexible width.
Wait, is that a spring or?
This is spring.
It's a spring.
Because springs are about resizing and struts are about
Placing.
enabling us to keep the object in the same position relevant to the structure.
Exactly. So we have flexible width. Just like flexible width, we have also flexible height.
Can you use spring to define? So, for example, if you have those two squares that run next to each other, you want them to have the same width. So that if you turn into landscape mode, their width is going to increase, but you want to make sure that both of them keep the same equal width. Would you use strings to do that? Or?
Well, if they're already the same equal width, then they're both going to change the same equal width. Yeah. So it's all proportional, right? If these two are, let's say, 50 points here, and this is 100 points, and if we change the width to 200 points, both of these will become 100 points. Right? So if the mouth here was 100 points, let's give it 80 points, and this now changes to 200, the mouth becomes 160 points. Because it's totally relative to the parent view. So if the parent view becomes twice as large, the width of those becomes twice as large.
But without being nitpicky here, that means that also each of the space to the borders and also the space between those two views, they double in size, right?
Yeah.
So you got 10 equals 20. What if you wanted it to stay 10? So basically, you need to have.
So we'll go over that in a second, yeah. So that's a stress. Okay. Right? Anyone have questions on springs? So we have the option of telling the object to have either a flexible width, a flexible height, or both. Right? Now the way struts work are, say we have our width is larger for these two, but this is larger, right? However, this is spanning below our screen because our height here was larger, right? So how do we place this higher? And how do we get things to stick to the corners, right? So we can change the width here. If we left the width as is, say I want the width to be 50 pixels, no matter what. Or points. Thank you. I have more pixels today. Yeah, both Thomas and I are kind of hybrids. We both work in web and mobile development, so we go back and forth all the time. So if I didn't give these a flexible width, then my eyes are on the corner here, right? So now the way struts work are, we tell them that we want to have a flexible side opposite of the side where I pin it at. So if I want to pin it to the top left corner, I give it a flexible right side and a flexible bottom side. What this means is my top left, my top margin, my left margin stays as is. It stays put, it stays pinned. However, my right side, my right margin, becomes flexible based on this width. Same with the bottom side. So whenever you want to pin, if you want to pin a top left corner, you give it a flexible right margin and a flexible bottom margin. If I want something in the top right corner or bottom right corner, I have to give it a flexible top margin and flexible left margin. So it's the reverse of wherever you want to put it at. So we have flexible right margin, flexible left, flexible top, and flexible bottom. questions?
This is just with struts, right?
Springs and struts.
Yeah.
So springs was these two.
Yeah,
Struts was
yeah, that's what I meant.
So you have something in a frame, you define your frame, and then are the springs and stuff, so they modify, and do they modify your frame? I guess you can choose
the
that.
springs and struts change the property the way you're applying those relative to the frame, to the overall parent frame. Questions before we do some coding? Springs and struts is pretty straightforward, right?
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, formal name for those is auto resize mask. Springs auto resize mask.
What is that?
It's springs and struts. It's basically the method that we access those things through. Springs and struts is kind of the known terms when you speak about them. But the actual method to change those is called auto resize mask. Yeah, we'll go with it.
That's the method.
That's the method. And we can stack these as many of these as we need with the pipe with a straight line. So we have flexible right margin, flexible left margin, flexible width, etc. So cool. Let's code something. So let's start a new project. And I want us to do 2 steps here. First step is we'll start with a new project that has a storyboard and has the view controller and interface builder. And we'll build all these in already predefined view. And then I don't want to spend too much time on this, but we'll also actually, we'll teach you how to build out your own view through code without actually ever going to the storyboard. All right, so new Xcode project, single view as always, and we'll call this programmatic views.
Are we ever going to do anything besides single view applications?
There's really no need because all those other applications are basically other controllers, view controllers of what we've done.
Oh,
That's all they are. I'm calling it programmatic views. You can call this whatever you like. When? I never ever use it. Do you?
Snapchat is built on that principle.
It's what?
Snapchat is built on that principle that you have few controllers laying next to each other. But I mean, you can do everything in your single view application and start from there.
Yeah, I mean, the only time I ever don't use single view is when I build a game. Cool. So we have our storyboard. So everything we'll do will be through code. And we'll start with some very basics, then we'll start add some other things from there. And I'll go ahead and clean out this warning so we have a free, clean project. Cool. So let's start by just building a UI view. So I'll create a variable, call it my view. And then we do UI view is the class. And in here, when you do UI view and open the parentheses, you'll see that we have a frame, right? And the frame is a CGRect type. So if I do CGRect, you see the autocomplete with all of our properties. So I'll give it X of 50 points, Y of 50 points, a width of 200, and a height of 200 for now. Now, another way to go about this would be to say, I could also say var my view frame and say CG rect, and then fill out those, say 50, 50, 200, 200. And then instead of the CG rect here, I can do that. I prefer this. I'm lazy. Do you have a preference?
I will also do it in one line at a time.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah.
Okay, which one are we naming it?
I'm sorry.
Are we naming it CG floats?
CG floats. Yeah. Always CG floats when you're drawing stuff. So let's also give this view a background color. You guys remember to do that?
Self.myview.background color.
Why self? So
No.
yeah, but we didn't do self because my view is in the function. It's not in the class.
Okay.
Background color, and we'll say UI color dot. I'll go with red for now.
Also, guys, use autocomplete for your CG rect. You should only have to type 50, 50, 200, and 200 and do the
Yeah.
CG order.
So 50 tab, 50 tab, 200 tab, 200. All right. So there's one more step to actually add this to our view. Right now, we only have defined this, right? Right now, this does not have a parent. Remember, every view must have a parent, must have a super view, right? So when we drag and drop things from our object library into our interface builder, that by default sets the parent of that object to the parent view, right? So right now, we don't have the luxury because we're building by code, so we have to programmatically say that I want the parent of this view to be the overall view. So the way I do that is do self.view .add subview, and then we pass in my view. Because remember, every view needs to have a parent view, needs to have a super view. So that's what we're doing. We're actually giving this a parent view to tie it up to. Because this frame over here, it's relative to the parent, right? The X and Y is relative to the parent. So right now it's relative to my main view.
So you basically just said that this view that I'm doing is the super view of my view.
So over here I said self.view, and self.view is this over here. This is self.view. So this is the main high-level view. So I'm saying to my self view, to the view of this controller, which is the main view, add whatever I did in code. Andre, did you have a?
Yeah, you just answered, I was gonna say, you refers to
Exactly. Exactly. So self.view always refers to the main view that our controller is associated with. So
what is this, I guess we're gonna see.
give me 1 second. It's already in use. So there's our red square, right? So 50, 50 in the corner, 200, 200, And this is the main view, right?
So the red box, square, rectangle, which is square, is the subview.
Of the main view.
Of the
Exactly. Exactly. Rob?
The origin, so top left corner, is that below the battery bar?
No.
At the top? It's at the very corner.
Yep. The very corner.
And
So-
how many points is the bar at the top?
44, I think.
No.
No, it's
No, that one's like 20. 44 is the
navigation,
toolbar at the
yeah.
bottom, yeah. I believe it's like 14 or 20, something like that. I'll have to go back and double check. Maybe 18.
You always do things points by like X and Y, right?
Yeah.
Like aren't the icons supposed to be 44 by 44 points?
Yeah, width and height. Yeah. So 0, 0, you see is at the very top. Cool. So far we have a super view to our my view, which is the main view, right? So let's programmatically add a label, and let's add the label as a subview of our red square. And let's actually make things a bit more semantic, because right now my view doesn't really say anything. We're at a whole bunch more views. So I'm going to change the my view variable to red box. I'll go back to 50-50. 50-50. Cool. So the two steps of adding an object are we need to call the class stored in a variable, set some properties. We always need to do the cdirect, and then add it as a subview to a parent view, right? So that step is very important. So let's do the same thing with a label. So I'll call this red box label. And just like we have UI view, we also have UI label. And again, you'll see UI label requires us to have a frame. So go ahead and do that. So cdirect. So now I'll give this a x of 50 again. So 50. I'll give it a width of 100 and a height of 30. Now, this x and y, is this going to be, let me run this. Is this x and y going to be, it's the same as this, right? It's 50-50. So does it mean it's going to be over here?
No,
Because it's
so
subject to that
Very good, guys, yeah. So the x and y is relative to the parent. Because the parent's going to be the red box, it's going to be 50-50 from the top left corner of the red box.
could I have a width and a height that's equal to the parent?
Yes. So we'll do it in a second. So let's also change the text of this. Let's give it a red. This is just like a normal label, right? So red box dot label dot text equals hello world. And let's give it a text color. Red box label dot text color equals UI color dot white color. So far, so good. So how do I add this label to be a subview of my red box?
Red box dot add subview.
Yep.
Red box label.
Yep, very good. So red box dot add subview and red box label.
I did red box. So red box, just layer the same thing on top of each other.
Red box add subview of what?
Of itself. Layer.
You can enter a view of itself. Try it. I don't know. I've never tried.
Tell me again why you're not self, you want to add.
Because self refers to class variables, and our variables are defined in the function, not the class. So if my variables are defined out here, I'll do self in that variable. But my variables are inside the function, therefore there's no need to do self.
Okay.
So when we define red box, and we're declaring that as a sub view of like a default view, that's because that view, the self.view is like the default super view.
It's a super view that we get with the view controller.
Is there a concept of hierarchy?
Yep, there is. So we'll go over in 1 second. Let's play this. Let's run this, and then I'll show you how to view that. It's actually really cool, right? So this should be no surprise to anybody. Now we're here. So Dan's question was, is there a concept of hierarchy, right? So we can actually, it's a really cool feature. We can view hierarchy of all of our views and objects while we have our simulator running. So while the simulator is running, if you go into debug and then view debugging and then show view hierarchy, we're able to see our views and we can actually drag them and look at the hierarchy right there, right? So over here, this very left, this very right line is our window. This second one is our view. This is the one we added, and then the label was right here. So debug and view debugging and show view hierarchy. And you can drag. The parent of the label is red box. Because you see the label is now after the red box.
So the view controller that white, that green,
Yeah, so this very bottom one is your window. The next one is the view controller, which has the view. And then we have our square and label, right? So window, view that we get from our view controller, then everything else we have over here. Yeah. It's not as intimidating as you think, right?
And the view controller, even though it's a sub view of the window, it'll always entirely overlays the window.
Always. Yeah. So Alexi asked a question, can we make this label be the width of the parent container? And we absolutely can. So the way we do that is in our width, instead of doing 100, I can do redbox.frame.width. So you can always access the width, height, and coordinates of an object by accessing its frame property and then zooming into those specific properties.
So amazing that you don't have to do size.width anymore.
Yeah. You have to go an extra level deep. All right, so if you're on this, you'll see that the label, well, it'll still almost look the same, but if I give the label a background color, so red box label dot background color goes UI color dot yellow. It'll be pretty ugly, but in our case. So why is it spanning past that?
Because we said y, x.
The x, yeah. So if I say the x is 0, it should now be the full width.
You can also adopt complete frames. So if you would, when your label, which doesn't make a lot of sense, be a square like your red box, you could just do frame equals red box not frame.
So is there a property for a transparent color? Like no color, basically transparent.
There is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Zero.
clear color.
Clear color.
So instead of white color, just clear color.
Yep.
UI color, clear color. And it always takes the color of what's behind it.
Yeah, it just has no color. So it's
What's important that
some, like for instance, the table view has by default a white background color, I think.
Yeah.
So if you want that to be transparent, you say table view not background color equals UI color.
What if you do want to have a color, but only a certain level of opacity?
That's
You can do UI color and then color with red, blue, and green, but I will go over that in the design day.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there's
Can you go over the frame one more time?
yeah. So the frame, when we're doing this CGRect, all you're doing is setting the frame property of that view. So for us to access all of these, we have to go through the frame. So the frame is a struct essentially that has all those properties.
Yeah, but then like below frame dot, red box dot frame dot width.
Yeah, here.
Yeah. So here I'm saying from the red box, access the frame, and from its frame, get the width.
Oh.
How do you do it, like span the width of the red box in relation to the red box? That's what it's doing.
That's what it's doing. Yeah.
Doesn't that transpose it over?
That was because our X coordinate was set at 50, now we changed it to 0, so now
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
Sorry, missed that word.
What if you wanted to circle?
Just about ask this
Yeah,
real quick.
like, I don't, I just,
Circle.
cause
It's quarter
Is
radius.
there a
It's
direct?
corner radius. So
like,
Okay. So
yeah. So you do a red box
it's the same.
dot.
Layer.
Layer. That's right. Corner radius equals, and we'll just do 50 for now. So
When would you need to add, what was that? Masks to bound to masks.
we'll do it in a second. Yeah. Oh, so wait. So you're talking about positioning, or
So let's say your label equals width that is wider, and if you add it to your red box, right? So if you would say red box masks to bounds to yes, it would cut it off. Well, if you don't by default, it doesn't, right? You saw that it like went further than, so mask to bounds would cut it off. So
Okay,
you say this is a frame and nothing. If you have CSS, it's like overflow.
I've seen for pictures where I would say a rounded corner, the image view, but then once after the picture, and you would still have square corners.
Yeah, so you would have to do mask to
Mask to
bounds, and then you
bounds.
should, then you're good to go.
all right.
But you do mask to bounds to the super.
To the parent,
Parents,
to the containing element.
Yep.
Negative numbers.
Yeah. Whenever you want to hide stuff off screen or animate things in, you have negative. Cool. So most of our objects pretty much follow the same workflow. There are some objects which have slightly different steps, like a button, because a button has an action behind it, right? So let's work in adding a button, and we'll add the button to relative to our main view, not to our red box. Our red box is getting cramped. So I'll say a var, I'll say action button equals UI button. And then set the frame, CGRect. And I'll place this, our height is 200, our Y is 50, so I'll place this at like 300. No, I'll place this at 50, 300, give it a width of 200, a height of 30.
Self-done.
Um,
Self-done. No, self-done.
Well, so there's two steps I want to do before that. Step number one is our button needs to actually have a title, right? So action button dot set title. and we give it a title of, I'll say, click me. Now our buttons have states. Remember when we drag and drop our button from Interface Builder to our code, we select a state.
So, stupid question here, but when you do autocomplete with set title, you know, and you open the parentheses, right? So you have set title, and then you have the title string, but I just have a question. Why do the title, the word title, disappears versus, you know, before when you did UI button with the frame, the word frame stayed there? I'm just curious.
That's because of the external parameters. Remember, whenever we had methods and classes, our first parameter, it didn't have it wasn't required for us to have the external method, external name for it. But the subsequent ones will.
But here you got button frame. Why does the word frame stays there? Because following the symbol, shouldn't the word frame disappear?
Because here we required it. So over here, this is an external and internal. So let me click into that.
It also makes sense, right? Because here you're saying set title, so you know this is the title.
Yes.
While for state is not clear what this would be, so it's required. And while you set frame, while you do UI button, and then frame, it doesn't make sense, right?
Yeah.
It's not a UI button, while set title
Yeah,
already like says what the first thing will be.
Yeah, because otherwise you set title.
Yeah, which is stupid, right?
So here, the way it's implemented is frame is the init. So whenever it's in the init, we have to call it, right? So then if you click in the set title, or I'll click on the right button.
String.
See, this one has an external variable, and this one does not. Right, external parameter, and this one does not, right? So for state and state, and this one is just internal. Okay, and then for the state, so this is a state the button's in, right? And we'll just go for normal. So its normal state is dot normal.
Can you jog my memory, please? I just don't remember anything with state.
State.
Yeah.
So we have a button, and there's different states. So first state is normal, like we don't do anything. Second state is the first time you touch it. Second state is whenever it's being pressed. Third state is when you let go. So there's different states of how you interact with things, and you can set what happens based on those states. So you might want to say that.
Was that in the outlet? Inside the outlet definition?
Yeah, that's in the outlet. Yeah.
I guess we always left it on the default state.
Yeah,
right?
on touch up, and we'll
On
see the
touch
touch up in a second.
Yeah.
But see, so right now, so we can actually change the title for every state of the button. So the first time we touch it, it can state normal. When we press it down, it can change the name. When we let go, it can change the name based on the states. So for here, we're saying it will always be click me starting from normal because we haven't said anything else.
Well, the dot normal, I know it's an abbreviation. They aren't supposed to put something before, but you don't have to put something with the dot or.
Yeah, you can do UI control state and then dot normal, but it's just a shorthand.
Yeah.
Because it knows it's expecting a UI control state.
Got it.
So right here.
Got it. Got it. Okay.
Yeah, did you guys?
I was gonna say, like, when you see it now, dealing with touchscreen, how is it touching it when you press it?
Pressing is kind of like hold it down for a second.
Holding.
Press it. Yeah.
Also, you have touch up cancel or something like that. So when you start touching a
Yeah.
button and then you like drag out and release,
Yeah.
it's canceled, so it will never trigger a touch.
If you have a double tap, it will work the same thing, or it can go into gestures.
It's gestures.
Is there a highlight state as well?
Yep, there's a highlight state. Yep.
Selected is also one, which is very useful.
Cool. Save the set title. Usually when we do this, unless it's certain circumstances, you're gonna leave it normal. So final step for the button is we have to set its action. So we do action button. dot add target. And the target is self because this was being clicked. The action is the function that we call. So you guys remember with functions, whenever we have an action that we call an external function, remember the best practice for that right now? String calling. Very good. So I'll say press coded button. And then this is where it's a based on what action do we add the target. So we'll do touch up inside. What's huh? Did I misspell it?
Shouldn't you have a period?
Yeah.
If you like to type more, you can also say UI control event on touch inside it. That makes more sense too. I mean, it's really preference.
Yeah.
What is that? No, no.
Because you're not pulling from a class, you're just pulling a property.
Oh.
So our libraries are smart enough that it knows that it's making an assumption, but you lose that complete.
So if I added UI control,
You would have
it
all
would
the
autocomplete.
Yeah.
And what is it? It's UI controller.
UI control event dot touch up inside.
So if you click on add targets, you see UI control events.
And literally, there's nothing wrong with typing it. I normally type it out. It's just preference. Yeah.
I don't, because I'm lazy. So we have this. Now we need to build our function for this, right?
Yes. Right.
So we do function, press code button. Can you guys in the back see this okay? Right? And then whenever we do a drag and drop of our buttons, of IB actions, what do we need in there? A sender. Yeah. So we need the sender. And the sender, remember, it's either any object or UI button.
This is what I'm assuming to be a regular button. We have had any object. So
Yeah.
It's nicer there to see where this is coming from. If I'm reading through your code, I know this is like triggered by a button and not by a gesture, for instance.
I'm sorry, use this under gesture.
No, whenever you have an action, you need a sender. So when I touch the button, we'll have a print line in our console that says hello world.
Yeah.
Cool. Question on this? So final step?
Well, we need to add self-view.
Yeah. So right now this isn't associated with anything, right? So how do I add it to my main view? Self.view. Very good. So self.view.add. Why not working? And then
I clicked on it.
action button.
Is it best practice to write it with that object, or to include it up with like the rest of these?
So to write it in, what do you mean?
Like, I don't know, I just, for me in my head, I was thinking, I want to move the self.view.add subview action button to like up somewhere higher, not nested within the button, because it's like you're declaring the super view.
I see what you're saying,
Subview of the super
and that makes sense. However, we need to first define the button before we can add it to the subview. So the order of events needs to happen. Whenever I draw views programmatically, I normally have functions for all these. Some functions like draw interface, and it calls each one of these functions from there. It's all personal preference. Right now, we don't have that much in here. We only have a few lines of code, so it's okay to have to do with load. But normally, I have these in their own functions. And you can load and say call function draw button, call function draw red box, call function draw, and then when the red box, I have call function draw label. Preference, it's important for us to know the syntax, then you can extract it however you like. But now you know best practices of extracting functions in your code.
You said something in the way you worded it confused me a little bit. So the self.view add something for the button. It's self this time because the button is not within the red box. It's becoming the subview of the view controller class, which is a class.
Yep.
Hence the self.
Exactly.
Because it refers to that class.
Exactly, because the view is a property of the UI controller.
Does anyone have this wrong where my button, the label is text white? So
For which one?
the actual button.
When you run it,
Yeah, when I run it. So when I click random, so like it prints hello world. It's not showing us, so they try.
Is it white? Let's give a background color. I'll make the background color the button. So I'll say action button dot background color equals UI color.
Yeah.
So the button, Alexi made this point, the button by default will have a white color. So if you don't see the background color, you won't see it in your view.
Okay.
So I said the background color, funky, ugly green. Yeah. Yeah, you think it'll be blue, right?
I don't check this here, it's like 100% sure.
Is it black and blue? I don't remember.
Did
Yeah.
we just change it?
We just changed the background because by default our button color was white. So it was fading into the view, which is white.
The background of the button.
So the background as well as the text color was white.
You can also set action buttons dot set title color, and then you can give it a color. That also requires an action node.
For which one?
Set title color.
Yeah.
Which is cool, right? Because you can give it a slightly different color on touch, which gives feedback to your user that they're touching something.
Andrew, do you have a question?
Well, because she asked me whether using if the self view was putting it in the red box, and the signal was putting it in the view. But then I just tried it to see if I put red box in front of it, but it didn't go inside the
Yeah, because the button, the view is this whole thing.
Yeah, but I said I changed it like I would do the red box dot as the red box label. I do the same thing with the button.
It probably does, but because you don't have flip to bounce, so yeah, it does. Because this is x equals 50, so you add it again. So you just do x label that, but the red box doesn't outside of it. Yeah, you don't be separate from here. So this is right. If you would red box,
Yep.
You will see it. This is how the
Background, so.
Let's see.
Box label background.
So it's the red box label text.
So red box label dot. Let's do a new label and double check here. So we'll go to text alignment. And then you do dot center. So dot text alignment equals dot center. Or like Thomas said, you can say
How do you know it's dots?
you get used. It's syntax.
I mean, by default, you would look at what text alignment expects, and you would say NF text alignment bot and then center. But after creating 100 buttons, you'll know that you can do dot center.
That was my question of the day when I asked you about that.
Yeah.
Well, like when I clicked in it, it said it was expecting and then center and right and left are words. And I just tried it out.
Yeah. All right. Questions so far? Is this making sense?
Yes.
Cool. So essentially, any object that you have access to over here, we can add programmatically, and we definitely don't have time to do that. But following this syntax, you can extract that logic into anything, right? So the flow is create the instance of that class, maybe system properties, maybe have an action if it's a button or something that has an action, and then you add it to the subview as a subview.
So if you go to your connection to Inspector, do these show up?
Nope.
No, because they haven't been tied in.
Haven't tied to anything. Yep. So I want to go over something that's very useful. Say we had buttons that should only do clickable once, right? Maybe like sign up or I don't know, maybe a button that only does one action. We want to afterwards remove that object. So let's make it so when we click our button, it totally removes the button, right? So I do that in my function after the action. Yeah. So when we click the button, the self, we have access to this button through the sender, right? Because we're passing self to. So when I click the button, I can say sender dot, and then remove from, where's my autocomplete? Super view.
And if you remove from super view and it's a button, that means that now there is no, it's not like you can like when you make it in and then you make it
It's gone.
It's gone.
It doesn't exist anymore.
If you click at that position, you won't have that problem.
Let's see.
Product.
Huh. It's what? Thank you. Thanks, Andre. Wasn't that completing? So if I click the button, it's
So
not
it
gone
wouldn't come back unless I ran the app
Well, if you-
again.
again.
or you could create another function that brings it
Yeah.
back.
Exactly. Cool. Awesome. All right, let's take a quick 5-minute break and we'll go into springs and struts. Then we'll do an exercise that involves all of the above. Observe everything.
Yeah. It's actually pretty cool.
Yeah.
Just wondering, what you don't have to but like label text, make UI image, or do the same thing?
That's actually a good point. No, it's I'll do that in next. So for the UI image, we have to give it strings of the image first, of what the image name, and then do a UI image. And then the string is the extra step. If you do UI image view, that's the UI image. Because they have the UI image object.
Well, that's what I'm thinking, is the image object might be whatever size, right? And then if you want her to be size on the screen.
Yeah, I think that probably.
What would you say earlier about
Oh, yeah.
why would it be a case where you have an option?
Because we have this
high
does that function that doesn't use. And so it's
When you want something to animate from
so
the
we get that UI figure view. You know, that will be.
or whenever it's when I just have to use
Oh, yeah, you can be able to set up.
you can go you put negative coordinates and then
Okay.
Just have that star
I think a little bit more information.
sitting here.
most of the time.
I was rewatching. There's a lot of
So
over here, and then over here, look at here, you can put it on two pointing at.
So
So
one
when you're talking
cursor.
about, yeah, or
Okay.
like, in some of the other tutorials, like, it would be like this, blah, blah,
So
yeah, or like, highlight.
Keep going. Okay. Sure.
yeah. Then you were
But on the other hand,
so because
when you do say over here, then it like triggers my memory to like try to remember.
To think about it.
So,
No, I'll just highlight.
Like over
Oh,
Like this.
you're not.
I swear.
You're sweatband on.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what I'm doing.
You look Sheldon on Big Bang Theory.
No, this is a DARPA experiment. I'm serious. Like Navy SEALs do this. Or the Karate Kid. Or Karate Kid.
it would only be better if both was the same color as your strip.
Oh my god, I love that.
Just
But
like-
I didn't find any. No, this is for advanced, accelerated learning. I'm serious. This cuts your learning curve by roughly 50%.
By squeezing your head.
So
Not squeezing, no. I'm
Oh,
hooking
this
it up to
thing.
electricity.
Oh, yeah, these things send some like electromagnetic shocks.
They're not shocks. It's like,
I'm learning something! Ah, that needs painful.
it's a direct curve.
It's called
TDCS.
yes,
Transcranial direct
memory.
I saw that
Yeah,
shit on
there's memory, there's data learning, there's for physical learning. Oh, there's
I'm just saying, people that did.
There's
Doing
a
that,
startup
it's hard
that
to-
free
even
even
the
that
easier way would be
it's called the Focus.us.
Oh, okay, that was where I was.
Yeah.
But I.
Just
Right?
You should, you can just do from those ID is less than 8 or 10.
Can you feel it?
Yeah, and then like ID, there's one load of I divided by 2 equals 0.
One of the
And you just have one position outside of your group that you can comment to
You're
it.
saying.
No, this is electrical stimulation.
Okay, so you're saying just.
So basically,
So what I did is I have.
it's a it's a non-chemical, it's an electrical stimulator. This particular combination enhances your learning capability.
Oh, okay.
So
Yeah.
yesterday I used it as a
Create
gym,
one for
and I
it
actually
that
burnt
goes
myself.
0 to 10, and then it keeps going right position outside of it, and then it just uses them all.
No, but I've been using it for like 2 months. I actually put on my brains all
And then you can do all this in like 5 or 6 months.
I mean, is it supposed to be used actively? So what do you call it?
Just because it causes circulation more. So that's why I bought those bands.
Is that the EKG?
Yeah.
That's
Have you heard of it? Yeah, it's really good. I've been using this for like a month and a half, 2 months.
Yeah.
Because I have a lot of deadlines with consultancy. Going on no sleep, you need these things. It's really good. I use this always, with in combination with those, with the ginkgo biloba herbal pill.
I use it all the time too.
And the ginkgo biloba, if I go one day without that, I go crazy without it. It's
Super
amazing.
focus, yeah.
Yeah. See, that's how we became so good at programming. This? Oh, the ginkgo. Just any CVS actually. It's Russia.
GNC, Vitamin Shop, whatever.
Yes, definitely.
I'm taking this whole thing, are you kidding? Like, you're being directly broadcast now.
I elevate your anxiety levels.
No, this is not. This exact. It's constant.
Those have teeth.
And you feel that. You feel like that tingly thing inside you, but it's not for. That's not the actual effect. The effect is it's like it stimulates your brain cells.
Wow.
So DARPA uses this in Navy SEAls, and they just become very. I mean, but this helps a lot. This helps. I actually tried using that completely. So, excuse my language, but truly fucked me up. Adderall for ADD. I used it 1 week. killed me. I
Really?
could not
I
take
feel
it.
whenever I think that, I feel like I'm limitless.
Well, that's exactly when I started doing all of this. Do you know that movie with Bradley Cooper, Limitless?
Yeah.
That's when I started doing all of this. So games is now work, and I started taking the Jinko, and the Jinko was really good.
I know, I every once in a while, it's an emergency.
What? Adderall?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You just have a supply point?
Huh?
You just have a like supply point?
No, but I have a lot of friends who have.
No, I went to my doctor. I was like, if you don't give me this, I'll get fired. There we go. But he gave me another version. He gave me Adderall. He gave me something kind of stronger. So I think that's why it didn't.
5 ends?
I made one.
No,
Ritalin?
no, not that I know. Because I wanted it.
I went to the doctor, and the doctor actually prescribed me. He didn't let me, but I didn't want to become dependent, so.
Yeah.
Hold this. It's the future.
Future coding.
Inspector workouts. This is how to accelerated burn. So this thing like electrically stimulates my brain cells. I'm not gonna shock.
Yeah, no, look,
There's
there's
also
there's
taking
science
this
behind
too.
I need this.
that. There's science.
If you don't take any of this and I continue taking this, I'll be like you now.
All right, guys. So Rob actually reminded me there's one more option I want to go over before I do screen instructs, and that's the images, because images they're a very common object we're going to be using, and they have a couple of additional steps that other properties don't. So go online or find an image in your desktop and drag it into your project. So I'm going to use, take a wild guess, Ina.
Yay. You have a picture of her?
Yeah, I have lots of pictures of her. Do have a picture of her.
These guys raised $2 million.
Wait, it's Nikes or?
No. This is just a headband thing to be able to get this.
Yeah.
This thing. This balls out. Creates short.
What is this called?
Focus. Focus. FOC.us.
It's little Ina when she was
Oh my god.
when she was now she's like
What kind of dog is she?
Border Collie Australian Shepherd.
Adorable.
Yeah.
How do you love her?
So
Now she's like
Yeah.
do we put that directly in the folder or
I'm just gonna drag it into the project folder for now.
so you don't use the image assets?
We can. We'll
I'll go over that.
yeah, Thomas will go over that.
Make sure copy items if needed is
Yeah. This copies a version into your project. Otherwise we'll just reference it as a shortcut.
What are we trying to do?
An image, any image.
We delete the resources or any image.
Any image.
Okay.
And make sure you have checkbox the copy.
Size does not matter. Would it not mess something up?
It doesn't matter for now, yeah.
That's what she said.
That is not what she said.
No, I
So let's take 2 more seconds. So you should have an image now somewhere over here.
Are we staying in the view did load?
We're staying in the muted load. So I'm gonna call this image Ina image. And this is a UI image. So far, pretty straightforward, right?
There's no CJ reg.
Not yet.
UI
So-
image is not something you see on your screen.
So we'll go over it in a second. So the UI image named Ina, the JPEG. So the JPEG is a string that refers to the name of the image here.
It has to be the same.
Yes.
I'm sorry?
It has to be the same as the name of your image.
Yep, it has to be the same, exactly. Now, what's interesting with images is they require an additional step. We have our UI image, but for us to see the UI image, we need a UI image view that contains the UI image. So the UI image right now is just a reference to the actual image. So I'll do another variable called INA image view. And this one will be a UI image view. I'm sorry? She's very protective. She might bark at you guys.
Really?
And then image, INA image.
Okay, I just want to understand those two steps. The first one is basically declaring the image is there, and then the second one making a view out of that.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Now there is one thing missing here that we had in all our other elements.
Well, some view.
Well, we did add subview, but it's one more step, right? So what are the requirements for us to add something into our view?
You wanna know where it's at.
Where it's at in the size.
Yeah.
Yep. So we do INA image view, and then what was that property that contained all those the frame. Frame is a property, direct is a type, right? So dot frame equals, and that's where we do cdirect. Cdirect. My autocomplete is totally goofing up here.
Mine too,
Right.
What's going on?
frame is contains the properties and the frame is
Sorry?
frame is
The property
yes.
So it's a property that contains properties.
that contains a struct of properties. Because remember, classes are objects that you change things for and you reference for, and structs are actual values, right? Remember when I said structs, a good example is a geometry shape? What's a geometry shape, right? So x50, y50, width. Actually, for y, I want to do 350. Width, I'll say is 200. Height 100. And I hope it doesn't break, because then I'll complete. Okay, and then the final step. Self.view dot add subview INA image view.
Nice thing to know, maybe you can access the actual width of your image on the UI image, so not UI image view, which can be useful to like calculate aspect ratios or like use the same exact width.
Yeah.
So you can on INA image frame or no, the size of it. Sorry.
Go back and double check.
You can
just use the what
you can
it is
yeah,
actually.
but like let's say it's way too big, you can still like calculate the aspect ratio by dividing the width by the height and use that to like redraw it small, but still like
The
maintaining the
size.
same aspect ratio.
Yep. So dot size. Dot. It's not working here.
Oh, width and
Dot
then
width.
yeah, it's just
Yeah.
Same for the height.
Yep.
I mean, if your picture is 3,000 pixels
It's gonna be
wide, it's going to be useless, but it can be useful.
You didn't declare it as an optional, so why are you unwrapping it?
Because it's not sure that email.jpg is in your project, right?
Yeah, that's why we do. That's the purpose of having this UI image over here.
So the UI image class implies that it's optional.
Exactly. It brings back an optional
Okay.
image.
Right, so you said we can have the view, but the view does not necessarily need to be filled with an actual image. So is that how you explained it just now?
So I can see why this would be like a real world thing you use a lot. If that image that you wanted to add, that you just added, you wanted that to be just same button. Does the button go from target itself to that image?
So sorry. So the question is, what if you want the button to be an image, right?
Yeah.
So you can have a background image of the button. That's how you go about that.
Okay.
You can set some background image and reference in that image.
That's it.
Did you say there was a way to maintain the aspect ratio to like set one of the sizes?
So you could do it by using mathematics, right? You can set the width to, like, let's say pixel 100, and then on in an image you would calculate aspect ratio, which is a very simple mathematical like division, right? And then you would do 100 times your aspect ratio to have a smaller image, but like this correct aspect.
So you already divide by 10 for both, right?
Or you can do that.
Very interesting question. So, you talked about having a picture in a button. Can I add a subview to a button?
Yes.
The label in a button is a subview.
So would it be better to have a view to which you add some type of thumb gesture, or is it better to have a button? Like if it's something that I want to click, it's better.
Usually a button. Yeah. It depends. Usually a button. Cool. Questions so far? So the extra step here is we need to first define the UI image and reference the image string, then do an image view with the image, and then set the frame. Cool.
How do you shrink the image?
Sorry?
Size that width divided by.
Yeah.
It's huge, so.
Yeah. So I did in an image the size that width divided by 3, or you could hard code the size, but proportions will most likely be off.
Silly, I'm asking way too much about the dimensions, but if I just want to make sure that the image is, let's say, half the width, half the height, whatever, of the UI controller, how would I do that?
Say self
Of the UI control, yeah, the self.view divided by 2. Oh, so self.view.frame.width divided by 2, or self.view.frame.height divided by 2.
And if you want to keep the aspect ratio, you would have to use that to do the calculation for the height.
Okay.
Makes sense?
Yeah.
All right. So let's. So now when I rotate, and to rotate is command left or command right, we see what we mean now with our ratios, right? With our positioning. So I want to make it so command left or command right rotates it. So let's make it so our red box is on our top left corner and always stays there, and the size does not change. And let's make it so this green button stays relative to the top. Let's make it so that this button stays in the middle over here and expands the full width of our super view, no matter which orientation we're on. So let's stay there. And I want to make it so the ENA picture is always stuck in the bottom right corner, right? So when I have it in this view, it'll be stuck somewhere over here. When I have it in this view, it moves somewhere over here. Right?
Yeah.
So we have to set the springs and struts or auto resize mask for each one of these properties specifically. So let's start with our green button, which is the action button, because that one is, I think, one of the easiest ones. So the way we access springs and struts is we do action button dot auto, yep, resizing mask. Equals now you can do just the periods here, but for this one, because it's a lot of stuff we're absorbing, and I want to autocomplete, it'll be easier. I'll do UI view auto resizing. But I want this to be relative to the parent container to be flexible. What is that? Is there a spring or a strut?
It's a spring.
Spring. And which spring is it? Flexible width. The flexible width. So one more thing to note here is by default the width of the button is 200 pixels. Let's make the width of the button be the width of the whole view. So how do I do that?
So the frame, the width.
Very good. So if we just leave it there for now, what's happening is this is going off screen, right?
Because we started.
Yeah. So I'll make the X 0 for action button. So it starts at the very left corner. So it spans the whole width. Ah, great. I gotta restart. Give me one sec, guys.
You do like a cell tab, you dot right down with -1.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Or minus 100.
Minus 100.
Centers
Yeah.
if we cut it.
But like if you wanted to keep it just within inside the frame so that it's not actually edge to edge, it's like looks like, you know, it's like 95% of the width.
So
95 times cell.
So yeah, you can. There's multiple ways. You could just set X starting point and subtract 100, or you could exactly do what Alexis said, multiply it by a percentage. Right. So now when I change my rotation, that stays the full width of my container. Right. Any questions about this so far? Ina's getting lost, so we'll fix Ina in a second. I'm sorry?
I love the coloring.
Yeah, she is cute. And she knows it. Okay, so let's get back to our red box because our green button was really easy. If I want my red box, let's actually make it a bit more challenging. Let's have it stay the same size. However, we always want it to be this far apart from the right side and the top side. What do I set? Bottom and left. Very good.
Always the opposite.
Always the opposite. So if I want to be stuck to have this distance from my top right side, I always give it a flexible left margin and a flexible bottom margin, the opposites, right? So in our red box, we'll do red box, wrong place. Red box dot auto resizing mask equals. What do I add on here?
CG flow.
Nope. So this is
What
the
are we trying to do?
hold it on the top.
Hold it over here. Okay.
Auto resizing dot. What's going to be flexible? Which ones are we setting?
Flexible left.
Yep, flexible left margin, and then we separate them with this, with a pipe, and then UI view auto resizing dot flexible what? Flexible bottom. Very good.
What if I wanted it to be resizable up to a certain point?
That's where you have to go into auto layout. So yeah, springs and struts as limitations. No, we can do things like we can measure whenever we resize things. We can measure the size of the screen, the size of the object, and limit it that way. But it's a very long way of going about it.
Well, I mean, there are only a limited number of anyways, iPad and iPad mini.
But it's only going to grow. So right. So now it keeps this distance from the top right side, no matter what. Right? Question on that? So let's fix Ina, and then we'll do an exercise. So if I want Ina to always stay always stay this far from the bottom, what do I do? Yeah, very good. So I say Ina image view dot auto resizing mask equals UI view auto resizing dot flexible top margin. We can. If we want to keep it a certain distance from the right. So let's add a UI view auto resizing dot flexible right margin. Yeah. You don't. No.
What happens when
Yeah. So it stays on the left side because it did flexible right margin. Again, this isn't a very pretty app. This is just an example. Right. So the way struts work is they stick our object wherever we don't give it a margin. So wherever we give it a margin, that becomes flexible based on the parent data size. So if you think about it, when our phone orientation changes from portrait to landscape, our view size changes by default, right? Our top level view becomes the size of our UI window. So because it's our parent view, everything else is relative to that.
Unless we set the settings for the app that we only want it to be landscape or portrait.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. Question on this? Yeah. Donna, do you have a question?
So, would you say the person that's doing it both is just the parent, the total parent is doing it like that? Okay, so it's not really wireless and it's always screening the margin is really to the.
Which makes sense, right? Because it's taking the first one is also able to
So it's always going to parent. So it's not. So if you have two objects, all around not parent, if they have settings that they don't relate to each other, so they don't have any of the choice.
Yes.
Okay.
That's what we'll do with auto layout.
Yeah, it is it's your team.
What was it? It was a mask or the bounds or something. You want the sub view to match the.
Content. What was the full method for mask to bound? Mask to bound.
Yeah, masks.
Yep.
I think it's not on the layer property from real. It is.
Okay, so let's do a quick project. Don't worry about these two top parts. Again, this is not as important. We might go through this another day because there really aren't that many use cases for us to create a storyboard programmatically. So do everything from the third item down. And we'll spend half an hour doing this. So we'll create a essentially login screen. We'll start with a storyboard and have the empty view controller. So add our label, our username, our password, and our button programmatically, and make sure that they always span the full width of the page. And they always stay, again, relative to each other at the top. They don't get pushed down when you rotate the screen.
We just create a new view controller file in this file, or do you want a new project?
You can do that. Whatever's easiest.
You already have word on what being cast on the last week of February. We just had that speak today.
Yeah, I already told them twice.
You did?
Yeah,
Is it persistent?
persistence, yeah.
I'm gonna tell them again.
Okay.
So you're using
Again, forget about the first 2 points.
You said we want to get this span the entire way to just object view of the window.
Yeah.
So does that in any way, it's shouldn't, but does that in any way affect our choice of the X, Y coordinates? We can still choose them.
No, no, it doesn't.
It doesn't.
No.
That's what we did, right?
Well, sorry.
Well, actually,
yeah.
it's the entire width. Then
Initially it
X,
does. It
right?
should be the width of
This
the
isn't
full thing. So
So X should be X,
X should be at 0.
and Y does not really matter.
Is that
Yeah, it's not get really fancy. Give it like the better side.
All right.
I'm almost on my calendar at work.
You are? That's awesome.
I had to like create an illustration on it. That was recording now. So it's I feel like, it's cold, although only 3 months back, and it's like, just recommend it. It creates a new cycle. There's no consistency yet. I don't like say so already. So it's almost all time.
Almost there.
Yeah.
Is it gonna sync anywhere online or no?
No, luckily. I mean,
Are you using clouds?
nothing. So it's stupid, but they don't even require an account for it. So it's like,
Yeah.
But I'm also pretty happy there. We still have, I have to do internationalization, so
Yeah.
Chinese,
Oh,
Japanese,
yeah.
and German. Fuck.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. I haven't done differentiation in like 4 years.
yeah, I don't want to deal with it.
Yeah, I don't do it.
And then you also need to be able to like, when so in-app purchases, they can like buy additional stuff. And then one of them is like you can export your data to iCal, so I have to like connect to the calendar framework. So I don't want to think about it. It needs to be ready.
It needs to work both ways, or just
No,
just
no,
speed
no.
to it?
Yeah, yeah.
That's
I mean,
not that
that's yeah, but it's
It's
not
still-
that adding it. It's like when they change stuff, you have to
Sure, sure, sure.
iCal to keep track of like. I think like no, you create a new calendar and I don't know, work with the calendar.
So, I did some that, but it wasn't giving me how to do it. Just size, it was always size to fit. Is that because I haven't yet subviewed it?
No, it shouldn't have something to do with that again. You have to frame first.
You guys remember whenever you set the size and the coordinate for an object, we do a CGRect for you to be able to reference those properties again from outside of it. You have to do a frame and then a property. So if I have a box with a that has a CGRect in size, for me to get the width in the box, it's box
So you
dot
can
frame.
view like the size of it.
So to be able to
Access
access the
without the frame.
CGRect
Yeah,
properties,
no,
inside,
with the frame, and with the size.
you have to do
Without the size.
object dot frame.
Okay, yeah, got you.
Does it matter if I create a controller in the same file we just did our working? Is that gonna screw it up because there's no two?
Also, never use underscores in your Never.
Okay, so I just learned.
Should be always all letters, uppercase.
Yeah, it's gonna be, just nothing.
Everyone got this? Can I erase it?
So you said you want each element to span the entire view.
Yeah, so whatever orientation you're on, whether it's part of the landscape, that is spans full width. Now if you wanna be a bit fancier, I told we make 50 points betting on each side, no matter what the orientation. They'll give you a bit extra operations.
The easiest thing is to just create
How'd you do that? You would have self-view frame with negative 50.
Well, so it's 50 each side, right?
50 on each side, exactly. So how would you do that?
So 100.
Oh, okay, yeah, exactly, okay.
And you start with x50, then you have weight minus. So
Oh, yeah.
or you go with percentages and always like multiply by percentage.
But you can't set a percentage for x because x is a coordinate.
Yeah.
I mean, x has
Well,
to
you
be-
can do self view frame with times points, whatever.
When you're doing these boxes, do you always have to do self.view.add subview, or?
Yeah, whenever you're creating an object, you always have to add as a subview, whether it's to the self view or another object. It's up to you, but always add a subview.
I'm doing like the class hierarchy is the class.
Self.view.
So then you say-
Yeah.
so you always have to go through.
Ledger. That's it's all like tickets that were $290. Yes.
You've been?
Yeah. Yeah, I've been probably stay like sort of 2 days in the city and then or then people go more to like mainland. I've seen most of them, but like it's nice to get a little bit.
Yeah.
I was there's someone that used to work at ISL that is like organizing a conference now in like Baltimore, and they asked me if I wanted to go to get like $500 a year to go to conference in person. And I thought like I don't know if to secret conference, and I was like started looking up iOS developer conferences, and everyone here in DC is like goes all around the country, like 4 or 5 cities. No, I'll show it out. But the week that it's in DC, like my friends are visiting from Belgium, so I don't want to go when they are here for a week. And I was thinking about going with Portland.
Oh yeah. That's a good place.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's very well. Let me look it up. They're so expensive though, the conference, but I guess it was like $550 to get in.
And that's even not that bad. There's conferences. That's even not that bad in comparison to
Yeah.
some other ones.
Yeah. Fukuoka.
Ah, okay.
Is there a placeholder property, placeholder text property?
Self placeholder.
Yeah, it's pretty
Yeah.
but it's like in the middle of it. So like in the famous hotel. It's in the falls.
And the falls. Oh, no, that's the part. Okay. Oh, that's awesome.
That's pretty expensive.
Which conference was that?
It's the same one, but they do like a special one in Helsinki, and I think it's 4 days instead of 2.
Gotcha.
Faster you can type, guys. Faster. Now it's going to start to matter. Oh yeah, mass. No, attachment.
using this, but I don't know.
So if you look over here,
So I think in that plugin, you create a UI view that has its successful, so like you successfully logged in, and then you press that says dismiss, and then it removes the entire login.
just to give you an idea of how what that is. So if you click on here, those properties are actually in here.
Right.
So over here, the checkbox, over here
Exactly, that's right.
is secure.
Yeah.
Right. So next entry equals yes.
Okay, I thought I needed it. I went through all of them, but I put the text in front of it, so I
Yeah.
fixed it in.
Yeah, text is just for setting the
Yeah.
Secure text entry is how
exactly.
That's the letters.
Yeah.
Those buttons.
Yeah, guys, I think that's a good question. Was for the password, how do you make it a password text field, right? And there's no way we can cover all those properties. However, good practices, if you see an interface builder, the name for it as a property in code will be very similar, if not the same, as the one in interface builder. So if the checkbox for text field is secure text field in interface builder, if you do text box dot guess what it is? Secure text field, well yes, it's the same thing. Text entry, thank you. If you click, I think it's yes. If you click into it, I know in Objective C it's definitely yes, but I think it's yes. It's Swift as well. If you click it, it'll tell you what it expects. It's a boolean or yes or no. So, but yeah, then sure.
Text. I have a string, but it's also an optional because, I don't know. No, it has to be true because,
Well, then,
okay, so I have a text box that I enter the username, and it's gonna be in a string format.
the username.
The username, right? And they have to enter it in order to go forward. So it's the, I have user text dot text.
Yeah.
Right.
What are the coordinates for selling text?
So, what's the parent view? Yeah, so it's self the view, right? So coordinates are 0, 0, and the width is self view. The width, self view frame the width, self view frame. So like here.
Yeah, I know. Some things are so easy in the interface builder and then so hard in the
What's the difference between UI button and UI button type?
Uh,
There's a UI bar button, I know what that is, but
Yeah.
what's the button type?
reading there. So you type is a property of the button, or a setting for your button. So if you click on there, and then you might click there, it'll tell you that it's on. This is the properties of the button. So most likely, this is the last time you guys will use springs and struts, but it's important to understand how they work.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Well, you know, for the example that I was describing, right, if I create a custom object, let's say gallery or something like that, I can only set up, you know, the way it's gonna look, not using layout, because it's not gonna exist in my springs and struts, right?
Right, you set the auto layout after these that it's relevant to you. So we'll spend just a couple of minutes on this.
What was the class, super class for dot normal? Is it UI control or UI control state? UI control state.
Then when you type in the password, it gives you the dot.
Pure text entry.
Where would I need to look something like that? Like, can I just go to command?
So you do a command and click on the text field, so the UI text field, or you can go on Interface Builder and look at the option, and the property for it will be pretty similar to the naming convention in the Interface Builder option.
Or you go to the UI text field class reference on Google that Apple provides, and it like shows all the properties you can set and like has the explanation for each property.
Do you ever use Dash, Thomas?
Yeah, that's great.
Yes.
He makes so much money.
So much fun.
I saw an article recently.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't know, it was 25K a month. I think he was the only guy who worked on this, which is brand nice.
Dash lets you view documentation for pretty much any language library now, including Xcode documents. And I like the way you search in Dash much more than you search through Xcode. So all the documentation you can have access to Google Online, you can have access to offline in a structured format.
That's like you have like an Alfred dash.
I have Alfred Dash, so
And you just, yeah.
yeah. So I can do, for example, Ruby, I don't know, def, right? And it's breaking right there. Or,
So is it,
so,
you need to have an internet connection or is it?
only when you download, yeah. It's free to try, but it'll give you a 10-second wait time every once in a while, which is really annoying.
So you buy it.
Say bye. It's worth every penny.
Every once in a while, but like every once in a while it'll be like percent off, like every week or something. Pay attention.
Cool. So just 2 more minutes, and then we'll get back to this at the very end. I'm going to spend 10 minutes in scroll views because I have a personally 9:20 deadline stuff.
Here. Yeah, I say.
So you put the math to the relatives with it, right? So if something is it's not very, and it is high, the next one should be right or space.
Okay, so I didn't.
So
I didn't
it's pretty
and
and all that stuff.
Yes.
So then it's relative.
So one of them is even now closer to the device, so it's
This
a little
one
bit harder to name like bars.
so y is 5. So y here should be at least 25% of 30. That's basically. So yes, so yeah, you gotta do the math for all. No one puts it all the way up. You
So
can,
instead of what's it out of?
out of
That also use your resizing mess and stuff.
so if your box is whatever it's out of that box is
Take out the whole.
So if I have this, so then I shouldn't do this.
Yeah.
really with login box. Yeah, that's okay. It's up to you and your functionality what you're trying to achieve.
Okay. So then.
So this is where this is inside the box. So
That's not
okay. So it really depends what you want to do. So then you have so you have just run for it.
Oh, yeah, it's a simulator.
So if you have you and you have this box, and this box will say is self dot view dot width, right? And the height is
Here.
the frame width. Thank you.
Would I create?
And the height will say let's go with 300 points.
Like all these and then
Yeah,
get
it's 300.
Yes.
So then I have a label,
Yes, I can do it.
and then the box,
Get this. I mean, this is
and then a label,
check
and then a box,
maybe, but
and then a button.
Yes, they are.
Right. So then for this one, you can have like a x of
Okay, like
10 and a y of 10,
for one of those.
and then a width of, we'll say, we'll say the parent divided by 2.
So, and if you do that,
Or let's it'll be easy. We'll say a width of 100 and the height of 20, right? So this one needs to have a y, which is the same as this. So it'll have a y of 10, right? An x of this
give you
plus width.
Yeah.
So 110, 110, right?
Anyway, but.
Okay, so
Right? Then the width could be whatever.
more we
And then this one, you can keep the x 10 to line up. But then the y would be the y of this plus the height of this, in whatever spacing you want. So the y of the item before it plus the height of it plus whatever spacing you want. So 10, which is right here, 20, which ends right here, and then whatever space you want between here. Right? So it's relative to the other one. Yeah. So let's say this box over here is at a y of 10. It's 10 pixels down.
Yeah.
And then it's 20 pixels high. So for this one to go below that, it has to be at least 30 pixels because it's the y plus the height.
Okay,
And then add extra points for spacing.
right.
Now, one thing that Springs instructs, let's stop for now, guys. We'll continue this.
And then wait, so and then what was the height? Width and height could be the same.
So width and height, yeah, width and height of this you make it the same as the other one, so it lines up.
Okay.
So guys, let's stop for a second. I know this is fun, but let's go over one more thing before we continue because it'll be a continuation of this. So springs and struts are pretty easy to implement, right? We covered it pretty quickly and it makes sense. There's limitations. So if I have my app over here and I rotate, I can't say that I want my Ina picture to be this far away from my button when I rotate and when I never do anything. We're only setting the size relative to the parent container. So it's very possible we can overlay and run into issues like so, right? So springs and struts are, they're great because they're easy to implement, but they have limitations and are used a bit more complex. So constraints give us options to space things relative to each other, right? So I can say I want my red box to be here, and I want all my other elements to be positioned relative to my red box. That's what we're going to go over next class. So I want us to understand the limitations of constraints. Although powerful, if our layouts are easy, they have certain problems.
You can't set up constraints programmatically, right? You have to use
You can.
You can?
Yeah, you can.
Okay.
And there's actually a few different ways to programmatically. We're going to go over one in the next class because it's all language, which we're not going to cover. So, question on this so far? Pretty straightforward? Ish?
So far, we will have to, is there any way to combine, like you said, with the constraints, that's its own language, but combine like something doing programmatically with interface building?
Yeah, absolutely. So we can drag and drop our elements, for example, our object interface builder, and reference them in code and set its springs and structs in interface builder. Not the other way around, because interface builder can't access code elements. All right. So last thing I want to cover today is scroll views, and scroll views kind of have a relate to the frames and bounds. Remember how we talked about frames in the beginning of class? Frames are essentially the size and the positioning of the object relative to its parent container, right? So if I have a view, I give it a size, say 200 by 100, and then the x we'll say is at I don't know, 50, and the y is at 20. So the 50 and the 20 of the y are relative to this parent, right? Is everyone clear on that? Now the bounds are relative to the inside of our view. So what that means is in scroll views, we can have a frame which is 200 by 100. However, we could have the bounds size be 200 by 500. So what this does is this lets us have a visible area of 200 by 100 and lets us change the bounds of where it goes by this context of where we are over here. So what happens when we scroll up is this whole thing moves up wherever we scroll by, right, as we're scrolling up or down. So the bounds change based on our scroll. Does that make sense?
So the frame, again, is what's visible, and the bounds is the actual.
Where we are inside the thing.
Yeah.
But they still have to be within, obviously, within the view control.
Yeah. So the frame is its size relative to the view controller. The bounds is where we are internally. And then we have to give it a content size, which is this height over here.
I might have missed something you said, but with the dimensions of the scroll area, would that be relative to the object itself, to the view itself, or would it be relative to the UI view controller?
It should be, the bounds should be relative to what's inside that scroll view.
And then you said the dimension tells us how big the content.
Yeah, so there's three things in place, right? Frame, which we've gone over, which is the size relative to this. The bounds, which are the place of our content, right? So the bounds always start at 0, 0. For us to scroll down, then our bounds is 0, 100, 0 to 100, etc., etc. Then there's content size, which is how large the content is inside our frame, which might not necessarily have access to it. So let's go to code. It's one of those things where it'll be a lot more visible in code.
Can you write those steps? Just
Yeah.
Can you write them down?
Yeah. So scroll view.
And this is only the scroll view that has a frame, bounds, and size.
So table view technically is the same one, right? But it happens automatically. So frame is relative to parent, and that's x, y, width, and height, right? Bounds are coordinates inside itself, and then content size is how large the sum of all the contents is. So width and height of sum of content. And these are not necessarily steps, these are just terms to remember. So let's work on this really quickly. So let's draw a scroll view that has 3 squares inside. We'll add a blue square, green square, and red square. So I'm going to stay on the same view. I don't want to create a new project. I'll just hide Ina for now. So I'm going to go to my Ina image and comment that out. So I'll create a variable for my scroll view, and I'll say var, I'll call this box scroll view equals UI scroll view. And then we give it a frame with a CG rect. And for X, I'll do 50. For Y, I'll do 350. For the width, I'll keep it the same size as Ina's original. So for the width, I'll do 200. For the height, I'll do 300. Let's also give us a background color so we see, because by default scroll views are white, so we want to see where it starts and it ends so we can see what's going on. So let's do a box scroll view dot background color. Now, there's an additional property we have to set for our scroll view. So we have our frame, right? And bounds change by default. So what's the last thing we need to set for it? Content size. So I do box scroll view dot content size equals So you guys remember in the beginning of class, we went over all these new terms. We had CG floats, we had CG point, which is an X and a Y. Do you remember the CG property for just the size, for the width and height? So it's a CG size. But they are floats, right? So it's CG size that has floats for the width and height. And we'll give it a width of 200, and let's give it a height of 600. So what does this mean?
It's going to be the same width as our frame, but it's going to be twice the height.
The height, so it's only scrollable vertically, right?
You could do it both, right?
You can do both ways. You can also do zoom. We're not going to go over zoom today. So scroll views are really powerful because you can scroll horizontally, vertically, and zoom in.
Right now, we can scroll twice as long as the whole.
Exactly.
You can also set paging enabled, which is really cool because then you have the snapping.
Is it how maps, they use a scroll view?
The what?
A map, like Apple Maps app, or they use scroll
I
view?
think that's a little bit different.
Yeah, that's a bit different.
Never mind.
Yeah.
But if you have a document, let's say like a
Yeah.
picture of like a document.
Yep.
zoom.
Okay, so final step is what?
Add subview.
Add subview, right? So self dot view dot add subview, and we'll add the box scroll view. So right now we have no content there. We just have a content size. But let's go ahead and run this and see what this looks like. Right, so we have this, and you see a scroll bar over here. It's scrollable, right? So for us to populate this with objects, how do we go about that?
Well, the object is going to be a subview of that.
Yeah, all we have to do is add those as subviews as this, right? So let's create a bunch of UI views, different colors. So I'll say green box equals UI view, and we'll say direct, and we'll say 0, 0. We'll give this a width of 200 and a height of 100 or 150. And then we'll give it the background equals UI color dot green. So let's do the same thing for a blue box and a yellow box. However, there's one main difference here.
The Y.
Yeah, right. So the Y of each one of these should always be the Y of the previous one plus its height, right?
It's a strange color. Yellow box. Yeah, yellow box instead of yellow color.
Ah, thank you, thank you. So then the Y for this one would be what? If it's gonna be below the, yep, exactly. So we'll do another one here, and I'll call this purple box. So what's the Y of this one? 300. And then finally, we have to add these as subviews. So I'll do box scroll view dot add subview, and I'll say green box scroll view dot add subview. We'll say yellow box, and then box scroll view dot add subview purple box.
Obvious maybe, but if you would try to do this before your box scroll view is created,
How do you know the exact?
yellow box on the background color of the purple one. Yellow box of background color line 48. 48. Left. Yeah.
Thank you.
box.
Thank you. Sorry, what was the question?
Why do the Y's have to be those exact? They have to be greater than 0.
Because
They're the others.
we're stacking them on top, right?
Yeah.
So the first one is a height of 150 and starts at 0. So the second one, because this one is 150, has to start at 150. And so on. Yeah.
I have to do this.
I do what?
I have to do this. Because when we did 3, but if I keep scrolling.
Right? Why does it keep scrolling? right? It's because our height of our scroll box is larger than our. Yeah. Yeah. So if you guys ever want to make the scroll box be the size of your content, you just have to do the math. You have to get all your content and add all the heights together. Same concept for the width. Yeah, I gotta get out of here. What's up, Andrew?
So that's different. So would it be the same? Right, because right now we're setting like a scroll differential, right? So, but how does that compare to, let's say, the table view would be setting cells disappearing to
Yes, the table doesn't have a background itself. So the question is, how does the table view know the exact height? Or
No, I think memory-wise, that like reuses stuff. This is not the case. Like this keeps everything in memory that is in there. So this is also not really suitable to. I mean, if you want to display like 1,000 things, like you wouldn't probably do this or use this. I mean, you could, but if it's text, you would use UI table view.
Cool. So let's finish off with finishing the previous exercise. And let's make it so it finishes for homework. And when you click on the button, it brings up another view programmatically. And that view has the directions are in the slides. When the view shows up, it should have 3 images in a scroll view.
that's a full view.
You could, it's up to you. It should be scrollable. And as far as the homework, we'll have a fun homework assignment posted tomorrow. I'm going to make sure that we got past all the content today. So finish off with this. If you have any questions, reach out. And exit surveys, please, before I leave.
I'll do it.
Thank you.
We already have the assessment.
I'm sorry?
Alright, so what's due on Monday is gonna be the assessment.
We post tomorrow.
There's already one, Mark's already posted.
Yeah, no one's in practice. Don't worry about that one. I want to post something more fun than that. That one's very dry. I want to post the real use case. It doesn't work?
That's why.
That works?